That clock says 7 o'clock, and that's usually behind my clock.
That was one of those
And-
meetings
Which
where
it
I
is.
thought it might be
close enough.
bad, and it was actually worse than I thought it was going to be. So, yeah.
All right. Good evening. I'm Keith Alley. This is the Board of Zoning Appeals for the town of Farragut. Just want to welcome everyone. The chair notes that it is slightly past 7 o'clock by our official in-room clock, and that we have an agenda this evening consisting of 4 items, but the third item, I understand, has been postponed. Is that correct, Mr. Shipley?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So the first item I have on the agenda is the approval of minutes for the June 28, 2017 meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Do we have any questions, comments, concerns, or discussion about the minutes?
No.
All right. Do I have an emotion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. The next item I have on the agenda is a public hearing on a request for a variance from Section 14-407, Part 2 of the town's sinkhole ordinance. The request involves filling a portion of a sinkhole area to facilitate the construction of an interparcel connection drive and a walking trail extension in conjunction with the development of a Dollar General store at 12,403 Kingston Pike, Zone C1. Tim Dunaway, applicant. Is the applicant here? All right. Good evening, sir. If we can at this time, I'd like to go ahead and swear in everyone who is likely to give testimony in this matter. If you'll please stand and just raise your right hand, and I'll swear you in mass. Does everyone swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All right, thank you. With regard to item number 2, can we hear from the town, please?
Well, I'm going to, first of all, introduce a new staff member in our department. I think he met most of y'all before the meeting, but this is Bart Hose. He actually did all the work on the write-up for this item, so I think he will be presenting most of it. I'll be here to help answer questions as well, but he put all the work into it. I just delegated, so... But he has a lot of experience as a planner. He worked for about 23 years for local planning, and staffed a lot of Board of Zoning Appeals meetings with different communities over the years. So he has a pretty good background in this. So with that, I'll just turn it over to him, and if y'all have any questions of me, I'll be around as well.
Okay. In doing this write-up, I think you have a copy of the actual variance application. It's Exhibit A in your packet, and also a copy of the sinkhole ordinance, which is Exhibit B in your packet. Basically, as background for this, the variance request has to do with the proposed Dollar General store that's being developed on the north side of Kingston Pike. It's shown there on the location map from the project plans. Basically, the development has already received site plan approval, and that was granted by the Planning Commission at its April 20th, 2017 meeting. Also, as part of that, they got a minor subdivision plat to subdivide that actual Dollar General site from that larger tax parcel. Both of those were done. Part of the approval process of that was to note on the plan and plat if there were any sinkholes. Initially, they didn't think there was any sinkholes on the property, but at a later date they identified one. And it was verified by TDEC, which is the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. They verified the presence of the sinkhole, and based on their plan, they now require a variance to carry through on their plan. If you see here on this, and I've not used this thing yet, but we'll see whether or not I can make this work. The sinkhole in question is this area here. It's bounded approximately by the 934 foot elevation line. It appears to be part of a larger sinkhole that's located on the south side of Kingston Pike. It's probably an extension of that contour across. And what they're proposing to do is to fill it in connection with this eventual access road that'll come across. That'll be extended across, and also a walking trail that'll extend across there. So, and the eraser is there. So that's basically why they are requesting the variance at this time. The sinkhole drainage also comes across here at this smaller pipe inlet here, and that's pre-existing. It crosses under Kingston Pike, and it's already present. So, and of course, Kingston Pike is already filled across that when it was constructed at the time. The C1 zoning that's that this property falls into, it does require context-appropriate pedestrian and vehicular connectivity. So that's a requirement for the town now in the C1 zone. And the Dollar General plan does incorporate both those elements in the access road and the walking trail. But again, it conflicts with the sinkhole. So, now I got to advance this thing. Oh, that's right. Sorry about that. So that's the site, and it's undeveloped site. It is part of a larger undeveloped area, and when we were looking at this project, we had to evaluate it in terms of its larger context in the area. It's part of 4 large undeveloped parcels. So we had to consider not just the effect on this one lot, but the effects on the adjoining lots. So we had to basically weigh and balance the purposes of the town sinkhole ordinance, other competing public goals such as connectivity, the characteristics of the site and the surrounding area, and the fact that it's also already been permitted by TDEC for this project. The 2012 Comprehensive Land Use Plan update and the town's architectural design standards, they both identify connectivity as a very important public policy goal, and the town did amend its ordinances to require that. And so that set up a balancing act for us in terms of weighing the benefits of connectivity versus the benefits of the sinkhole ordinance. And some of the things we considered in doing that was the fact that it is a large undeveloped site. Generally the topography on the site runs up from Kingston Pike, so it gains elevation from Kingston Pike northward. There's a number of drainages on the property, or in the larger undeveloped area, not just on the property, but there's a large drainage. Whoops. No. There we are. Yeah, that runs down through here. There's also a smaller drainage that comes down through here that the sinkhole is actually part of, and then runs across the road through that culvert. There may be some additional sinkholes on some of the adjoining properties. There are some depressions that are shown on the KGIS topo, but those would have to be evaluated individually when those properties develop. There's also issues with access control along the property that we had to consider when we think about how the rest of this property is going to develop, not just the Dollar General site, but again, the surrounding area. The intersection of Old Stage Road, the intersection of Fox Den Boulevard, and some of the access cuts on the adjoining properties or on the properties across the street will all impact the ability of all four of these lots to get access cuts in the future along Kingston Pike. So again, we had to weigh those things out as to how best to allow this property to be accessed and how the connectivity between the lots would come into play in the future. Looked at that, both Mark and myself, and also with the town engineer. The town engineer felt like the location at the front of the property was appropriate, given the surrounding topography and the access implications on it. The developer's engineer also submitted some information regarding the impacts that this had on, or I should say the impacts that Kingston Pike had, and also on the drainage implications. The drainage was already provided for during the site plan approval process, so they've got a good handle on the drainage aspects of the site. And again, Kingston Pike has already impacted the sinkhole, and probably somewhere to the neighborhood of 15,000 square feet of fill and other disturbance. So you can think of it in terms of Kingston Pike's already largely isolated the upper reaches of the sinkhole that appear on the Dollar General site from the main sinkhole and the throat area, the actual area that takes the water that's located on the south side. And again, also TDEX has already approved the permit for injecting stormwater into the sinkhole.
On that side of the street?
Not on that side, because again, they're piping it across. That drainage culvert picks up actually on the adjoining lot, and it comes straight across. So there's a culvert approximately in here that takes that water across. So what they're proposing to do, if I remember the site plan correctly, is they're going to deal with their drainage on site, ultimately release it into that depression area. It'll go into the culvert that already pre-exists and runs under Kingston Pike to the main sinkhole here on the south side of Kingston Pike.
So it appears that we've got approximately a 4-foot drop, 934 elevation to 930.
I believe so.
On our side of the highway there, if you want to speak. We've talked about that. In the sinkhole itself, on our side of the highway, I don't have the topo, but
Before you talk, can you identify
Oh,
yourself
certainly.
and give us your address, please?
yes, Tim Dunaway, 717 East Bull Run Valley Drive in Knox County.
All right.
I think that's about right. 934 is the earliest drawing you showed the 934 contour real well, and I think it is maybe 4 foot at the most down to the invert of that pipe that crosses under Kingston Pike. So about 4 foot, yeah.
All right. Do we have any more from the town?
Sure. Just basically, in terms of our actual recommendation on this, we're not opposed to it being granted. Feel that it's in town with, or it's in line with the town's connectivity goals. It supports future expansion of a proposed walking trail along that side of Kingston Pike, and it doesn't appear to significantly increase the pre-existing impacts on the sinkhole, that's represented by Kingston, or that's represented by Kingston Pike, because we do feel and agree with the project engineer that the area that's on the Dollar General site is probably the upper reaches of the main sinkhole area that's located on the south side of Kingston Pike. So it's already been impacted and largely isolated from that. And the town's engineer agreed with that as well. So, however, it will require additional variances to be granted in the future as that extension both on the internal drive and the sidewalk is extended onto the lot to the east, the sort of triangular shaped lot. So if you grant this one, you're going to have to be prepared to grant one on that lot too, to further that connectivity goal.
have a general question. Usually when we are faced with a variance, we're given the rule on that we need to follow for a variance, and I didn't see that in my packet. Do we have the guidelines to follow in granting a variance available to us? Are they available to, that we can share with the board? I mean, typically they take into consideration the characteristics of the land, unusual shape of the land, the usability of the land, and things of that characteristic. But it'd be helpful for the board to see the exact rule, I think, in granting it or considering to grant a variance.
Sure.
One thing you have to keep in mind with this particular variance is it is a municipal code. It's not a zoning ordinance about variance, though we do encourage pretty much the same logic to be applied as if it were a zoning variance request, a zoning related variance request. So in this context, we would look at the physical condition of the lot itself and whether the relief being requested is appropriate based on the physical characteristics of the land and what they're wanting to do with the land, and potentially what would that mean to adjacent properties. So is there anything inherent in the land itself or the general characteristics surrounding the land, like, for example, the throat and the majority of the sinkhole being actually bisected and separated from this area by Kingston Pike? That would be some evidence, in my view, that would be related to the site-specific condition of this property. I think the question, from my perspective in looking at this matter, was, again, like Bart mentioned, what does that mean in the larger context of what action tonight would mean in the future for the action, what would be needed on the parcel to the east and potentially ultimately parcels to the west that do have apparent depressional areas. If you go further around the curve, there's an area of drainage where it appears to be a depressional area, and so that is something that may have to come before the board potentially. We looked at what other options do they have. They could always flip the building and bring it up closer to the street and put the access in the back. But then the walking trail, normally those are either in the right-of-way or in the 10-foot area just outside of the right-of-way. That's general desirable practice along arterial streets, though you could certainly have a walking trail that would be separated from the road, and arguably that would be a more pleasant experience. But traditionally, you'll see as properties are developed, like the O'Reillys, for example, that's finishing up to the east, the pedestrian facility will be along the road adjacent to the roadway. The value of that is that you can follow roadway grade, and you don't necessarily have to make sure that it's ADA compatible if it's within the right-of-way and mirrors the adjacent roadway grade. So there's some site-specific things inherent to this property that I think we would apply to any variance request, whether it's to the sinkhole ordinance or the zoning ordinance. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
Is it fair to say that the same rule does not apply because it's not a zoning ordinance, that there's not a clear rule to follow when the variance request is with regard to a municipal ordinance?
Well, what you look for in the case of the sinkhole ordinance is the technical information that's presented to you. Are there any impacts? We look at the purpose of the sinkhole ordinance and make sure that the action being requested is not counter to the various purposes of our sinkhole ordinance, which I can get that.
Sure, well, and I can get that, and I guess what I'd like to know from our staff too is I'm looking at Exhibit B, and I'm looking at page 2 of 3 on Exhibit B, at section 14407, general requirements, subsection 2, filling or obstructing a sinkhole outlets and springs, which is what we're talking about.
Yep.
And it says, no person shall fill or obstruct the outlet to a sinkhole or systems of sinkholes, and this would be, I guess, considered a system of sinkholes,
Yes.
or fill over a spring or sink outlet without approval from the State of Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, Division of Water Supply, and Division of Water Pollution, and the town. Then this is the part that I'm interested in. No fill shall be placed and no construction shall occur below the sinkhole lip elevation, which is what the variance is requesting,
Yep.
unless proper and approved mitigation measures are taken and avoidance of the sinkhole, and this is the big part, is not possible. And
Well, I think what that gets back to is the competing objectives from the town. You have the sinkhole ordinance, which the staff, of course, supports and we believe in. I think it's a very valuable document. But that is competing with the other requirements now of the town, like the connectivity, if you put it in this location. If you flip the building to the front and the parking to the back, the connectivity could still be provided. It would not affect the sinkhole area. There might be other things that could come into play, because if you flip the building up further to the south, it may, based on the size of the building, at least as proposed, it could be an issue with the 50-foot setback from the outer.
Yeah.
So it's, in this case, I guess some of the uniqueness would be the sinkhole's characteristics itself, the fact that the throat and the vast majority of it's on the south side of Kingston Pike, and then the connectivity requirement of the town, and is the connection across the sinkhole in this case. It provided the applicant can demonstrate and the board can place on any action taken certain conditions and requirements of the applicant to protect the town, the town's objectives in its sinkhole ordinance. Then I think, that's really the question, is which of the objectives do you go with, which is most important, and you got to look at what they're doing to the sinkhole, what what the characteristics are, and they could flip the building. That's true. In fact, that was my request when they first came in with their site layout, was I would encourage them to have the building up close to Kingston Pike, because I like that type of layout. But this is what they applied for and did obtain site plan approval from the Planning Commission. But that was before we knew for sure that was a sinkhole, of course. So
Sure.
I don't know if I've answered your question at all, but
Can I throw something in there as well?
You've helped, in just a minute,
Sure.
let me finish with him real quick. The next sentence in that 14407 subsection 2, and again, I'm not trying to persuade one way or another, but I'm trying to understand the rule. I always want to understand the rule that the
Sure.
board needs to follow in order to apply evenly and fairly to everyone that comes before the board.
absolutely. Yep.
And, in determining the rule, I mean, I don't have any particular insight into what anyone was thinking when they made any of these rules other than what they say. And in looking at the next sentence in 14407.2, it says, no fill shall be placed and no construction shall occur, so those are absolutes, below the sinkhole lip elevation for the construction of local streets, driveways, and walking trails. And so, taking that as an absolute, we
Yep.
are asking to somehow undo the clear intent of what that says and balance it against other things that we're talking about,
Yep.
which is a location of a walking trail, which I'm being
Yep.
told could be placed somewhere else, even though this says that shall not be done. Okay, so that, I have the authority to balance and weigh all of that, but that
Yes.
weighs heavily on me if that's the rule that I'm given, and that concerns me somewhat. So with that being said, I'll open up to any other questions to
Yep.
the staff.
So I guess my question is the board expected to follow the guidelines set forth in our ordinances that cover how the board looks at variances, in this case, just as we would if it was a zoning issue? And because that would weigh heavily on me as well as, is this, does the applicant still have reasonable use of land? I mean, are we using that standard to make a decision in this case because it's a municipal code and not necessarily a zoning code issue? And I don't know if that's clear cut, but that's my question.
Generally, we've applied the same, and that's kind of the way all of our ordinances are worded, so that you apply the same general logic as provided for in TCA for zoning-related variance requests. So, clearly the applicant would have reasonable use of the property with the building up front and the access and trail in the back. That's true. Again, what we were trying to show was thinking about it from a broader picture, a broader perspective, and if we have this other town requirement now for lateral connectivity between parcels, both vehicular and pedestrian, I guess my question is, what if we run into this and we will run into this in other areas where we're trying to provide for that connectivity, and perhaps an applicant can demonstrate that what they're doing at that time does not have an impact, at least based on the evidence they provide on that sinkhole system.
I guess another solution would be that if there are two competing ordinances, that it might require the drafter of
text
the
amendment.
ordinances to
Yes.
clarify those rather than us have a decision that we can't reconcile with the clear
Yes.
language that we're confronted with.
And that can always be the recommendation of the board, is that this may need to be handled legislatively. You certainly have that purview to make that kind of a recommendation.
And that's also one of the reasons why we didn't just come right out and recommend in favor of it or against it, because we really felt like there was, a lot of balancing that needed to be done between the connectivity and the impacts of that on the adjoining properties. Because basically, where you put this one or allow them, to put it here, or if they're forced to redesign and move it back, that's, going to sort of set the stage for what the adjoining parcels are going to have to do to tie into that. So we were looking at it from the standpoint of not just this one site, but the adjoining sites along there. And then I think another thing that came into play when we were discussing it internally with the town staff was the fact that sinkhole had apparently been impacted a fair bit by Kingston Pike. So it wasn't a undisturbed sinkhole area that was being disturbed, but it's really an extension of an existing disturbance. So, which was another factor we considered in
That's why
looking
TDEC
at
was
it.
so confused at the beginning as well. I met with them very early on. Mark brought this up very early on, and I met with TDEC, and he looked, saw the condition. He initially said this is not a sinkhole. The sinkhole's across the street. But when Mark wanted more than just an email from him to confirm that for his paperwork purposes, I went back to TDEC and asked for a formal letter, and he went to a superior, and they looked at it again. Obviously, the contour is the thing that rules. 934 on the south side is the lip of that sinkhole. 934 on our side, connected by a pipe, Sure, that's part of the same capacity of that sinkhole. One thing to point out, though, is the amount of disturbance we're doing with our fill over the total capacity of the sinkhole is 0.1% of the capacity of the sinkhole. It is such a minor blip that needs to be expressed, that we're not really getting anywhere near defeating the function of the sinkhole, which is why TDEC issued their permit, that we don't need an injection well permit here. We could do the work as designed. I would like to throw out, I see your conflict. You've got an ordinance that calls for not filling in the sinkhole. And the language that says why, right behind it says specifically for construction of local streets, driveways, and walking trails. I get that. That's a button heads. I can take that part of the problem out probably if it's acceptable to everyone else. If you look at where there's 3 points where we're touching that sinkhole: the walking trail, the access connector, and the very tip of the upper edge of that sinkhole, our parking is barely touching it. The connector, future connector, and the walking trail could be pulled back 3 or 4 or 5 feet, whatever it would take. It's very little to get it completely out of the sinkhole. No fill would be required. I'll even put a retaining wall under it to make sure we're not touching the sinkhole, if that would help. That would get the language about the walking trail and the driveways not being a reason to allow fill off the table. The only thing left then would be fill, and we'd have a very small amount of fill, and it would be only for the stormwater system.
Well,
Obviously, TDEC allows for mitigation also. You have language in there also about mitigation, that it's, unless proper mitigation can be done, we can certainly show that we're offsetting that tiny amount we're taking out of that capacity by excavating further and giving that capacity right back to the sinkhole. But if it's the language bump that's the problem here, if we just take the walking trail and the driveway back out of the sinkhole area and don't show that we are not filling in those areas, does that make it more palatable to the board
Well,
here?
no-
The problem with that is that you've effectively prohibited the connection from occurring, and that's a
Yeah.
violation of the connectivity requirement. So unless you've moved the access further north and tied it into the adjacent property and the walking trails network somehow, then, you're kind of just stubbing it out and leaving it up in essentially a no man's land that would never get connected.
You could have a suspension walkway, like a suspension bridge.
Well, we actually
look
thought
at
about that
that.
as a
was my
possibility.
discussion
And
with TDEC in the field. I asked him, I said, we do our part. The idea is to connect this to future development. And there's been a previous development submitted for that corner, so it's a possibility. And so what would their options be? And he said, well, from our standpoint, you could mitigate if you filled and put culverts under it to catch the little tiny tip of the part that would be north of our connector drive, and you mitigated enough to displace the amount of fill it took to do the driveway, we would be fine with that. Now, Farragut may not be, but he also mentioned I could just do a bridge too and be above the 934. I mean, it's a stub right now. If we go as far as we can physically go to the property line and not be filling over onto the other property owner, which we're not allowed to do, as far as we can take that driveway is still a stub. Moving it back 3 or 4 feet to get it out of the sinkhole lip elevation at least gets the technicality of the problem you're hearing with the language right now off the table.
but like Mark said, that would be temporary, because the whole goal there is to eventually extend that across. And although their area is one area of disturbance, we also had to consider the fact that you will at some point in the future, if the property to the east develops, have to grant another variance on their side to also do the fill to carry it across. So we were again thinking not just about this one site, but the adjoining sites as well, in terms of what the impact of that would be, and also from we were less concerned with the drainage aspects of it than we were, the possibility of that sinkhole, settling or collapsing further, and the impact that would have on the access way and the walkway, particularly the internal access way. So if there was further collapse, if there was further sinking of the sinkhole of the landform, that could then have impacts on that. So, that's one of the purposes of the sinkhole ordinance is to protect buildings and structures and development in that regard. So we were really concerned about that and what that impact would be.
So if the design was changed as you described, and the walking trail was pulled back a little bit, and the access was pulled back, the access road, would there be a need for a variance request at all
Well,
at this point for this particular property if they made the changes?
Well, it wouldn't be satisfying the connectivity
Yeah.
requirements, the problem.
And that's code also.
yeah, exactly. At
Is that
some
code
point, that's
also
going to have to
in it?
need to be
Okay.
extended across.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You know, the whole point here is, at some point in the future, for this walkway, for this access road,
Very little. The field is.
Yeah, to go
and,
across.
and the walking trail to be extended clean across that entire sinkhole area to then serve a development on the adjoining property. And also, it to be extended to the west across that entire frontage. So there's another parcel to the west and then a parcel even further to the west. And all, so you know, we were, again, thinking about the extension all the way across there.
But our responsibility is the question about the sinkhole. Our responsibility is not the question about connectivity. Is that, in terms of our board? I mean,
In terms of that, but you're being asked to grant a variance to allow for the fill to be put in the sinkhole. And in our staff evaluation, we tried to acknowledge the fact that you were being asked to balance in your decision-making process, you know, the public good and the public benefit of the connectivity and putting in the shared access drives and the walkway across there versus the public good of protecting the sinkhole. So that's sort of the conundrum that you're faced with in terms of balancing two public benefits that have been identified by the town, you know, through its plans and its ordinances.
Sure. And Mr. Dunaway, I'm going to give you your chance, and Mr. Romans as well, but, and not at the risk of sounding completely outlandish, but literally, if the variance were granted, their obligation would be to just, if we can go back to that same one we were just looking at.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Would be to fill in, I'm going to approximate, but 1/3 of the sinkhole that's on their property, on their side, and build a walkway over it that would right
Let
now
me see if I can do it
go
this
to the rest of a sinkhole that's not improved, with the expectation that someday someone may build on the east side of the property and be able to then fill in the other part of the sinkhole and connect a sidewalk to it. But until such time as someone develops the east side, what we're going to have is 1/3 of a sinkhole filled in with a walkway to nowhere that is potentially just exposed to erosion from all around the rest of that sinkhole. Is that, I mean, if we granted that variance, the town would require them to go ahead and construct that walkway in anticipation that someday it may be connected to something to the east. Is that correct?
I guess if they pulled it back and didn't fill it right now, I guess you could make that argument, but at some point in the future, they're going to have to construct that.
But they can't
And-
construct anything on property that's not theirs. So,
Yep.
I mean, this sinkhole goes beyond their property line. Is that correct?
It does. It
Okay.
does.
So, I mean, their
But they'll-
ability to fill in any sinkhole is only on the 1/3 of the sinkhole that they have on their side of the property right now. So if the variance is granted, they're going to fill in 1/3 of the sinkhole and build something on top of it until something someday connects, and whether they connect it properly or that thing's eroded by then or anything else. Likewise, if we felt uncomfortable with the rule that we're given, they could build 1/3 of a sky bridge. So they could build 1/3 of an elevated
Yeah, which would be impractical
walkway,
right now.
which
Yeah.
which would just sort of dangle over the sinkhole until something is built on the other side to which to connect it. So I mean, either way, it's a walkway going to nothing at the moment, in the anticipation that in the future it might be able to connect to something. If I understand what.
True, yeah, but I mean, it's, what you do with this matter tonight, it would kind of predetermine what would have to happen in the future to achieve the connectivity objective.
Sure. No,
So, yeah, we probably wouldn't want them to, we wouldn't want them to have an erodible area, especially in a sinkhole. So that would have to be addressed. They could potentially pull it back to potentially avoid maybe all the fill in the sinkhole, but that's just a short-term issue.
Sure.
Because if they've stubbed it out with the, with the anticipation that that's where it's going to connect in the future, then you're going to have to deal with the sinkhole at some point in order for that connection at that point to occur.
The property owner that you bought this piece of property from, is he the property owner right beside you to the east?
To the east, no. To the west, I think it's the same group, but it has been subdivided and it's going to be separated. The lot that we're on and the lot to the west were owned by a partnership of which my boss is a member. It's family property.
The Shads?
Yes. And they've subdivided this small 1.3 acre, or whatever it is, lot out of that separately. So, but to the east, it's, I can't remember her name now.
Campbell.
Mary Campbell, is that right?
I have trouble.
So it's not ours. I see what you're getting at, but it's, yeah, we'd have loved to have been able to, when we talked about the connector at first, that's the first thing I thought of was how are we going to build this to the property line when we can't grade over on the property line? We're going to have to prop the edge of this connector up right at the property line, or, but the sinkhole obviously has complicated it. The volume again, though, is very small. I mean, I know schematically when you look across there, you think it's about a third of the area in plan, but the amount of fill that we're actually encroaching into the 934 contour, which is the capacity of the sinkhole, is again 0.1% of the capacity of the sinkhole, of the entire sinkhole. On our side, it might be more like 10% of our side of the sinkhole, but it's not a third by any stretch. It is an amount. I mean, if we had to fill to the property line for the connector and the walking trail, there would be some fill there.
That shaded area does not represent all the fill. It just represents our area of the sinkhole.
So it's on our side of the
If
property
you
line.
look at the grading plan, which you don't have, we're actually cutting some of it back to make that road, the access road come in. So we're taking some out.
That
And
adds,
then we're also, in that whole area that you don't see, or up above, I'll get my little pointer up here. We're cutting out a 4-foot deep bioretention basin that's taking the water into that. So we're not, stormwater wise, we're not affecting that sinkhole at all.
which is why TDEC said we were okay. The difference between the TDEC regs and your alls is about the language of thou shalt not fill inside the contour period. Yeah, all the years does allow for mitigation, and in my mind, what we're cutting out of that bioretention is capacity. The water that we're creating on our site used to go in that sinkhole and go into the pipe. It's now going to be held and bioretained, and that capacity in that pond far offsets that 0.1% that we're taking.
Well, TDEC doesn't look at it from a structural point of view either, so that's something that we do look at that. And that's part of Bart's recommendation, was talking about some language in there dealing with the structural concerns.
For roads.
Yeah, for the
buildings
road and
they
the
do.
walking trail.
They don't allow buildings. TDEC does not. You have to have the same 50-foot offset from the contour with a building structure as you all do. That they allow you to fill as long as you're mitigating and not disrupting the flow of and the function of the sinkhole.
Well, I sort of directed that for a bit. If anyone else has questions for staff, that would be a good time. Otherwise, I'd like to let Mr. Dunaway.
I'd like to ask one more question. So in the concept from the town's perspective, is if and when the land to the east is developed, is the primary access to that development, which I'm assuming is commercial, is zoned commercial, is that correct, the property to the east?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, and so would this access road that we're talking about be the primary access or secondary access? Or that's just going to be based on when they bring their site plan before the planning commission and
It depends on several things, but it could potentially be their only way to access the property, yes.
And so my
But
second,
we have a 400-foot distance requirement between access points on arterial roads. I think when we looked at that, you could actually fit it in maybe on the far east part of that triangular-shaped parcel.
Yeah, we did look at that with the town engineer, and you could potentially, meet that distance and get a cut in somewhere in about there, I guess,
Yeah, it's pretty far east.
just roughly. But again, with the shape of that property,
Right.
that could be a constraint. So we were thinking, that this, the triangular piece of property to the east could be constrained, and the only access they may be able to practically use would be the shared access. And, we won't know that until they get in and do their site evaluation, if there are any additional sinkholes or on their property or any impediments to their design, then, so that was an issue that we were thinking about. And honestly, the same thing as you move to the far west, because any access on the immediately adjoining property to the west will probably have to be aligned with Old Stage here. And then given the curve and the site distance area, again, without, the benefit of a site plan for that property, access along here could be constrained, particularly if it was, both right and left-hand turns, because there are access drives across the street here and here. So there would be quite a bit of things to look at there. So these properties all along here could be, very reliant on the internal circulation. They may have some combination of access cuts, or maybe, just, right in, right out only type cuts. So it again was something that we really had to sit down and look at for a while to think about, what are the impacts on this whole area for future development.
And so are the lots to the north, or the vacant parcel to the north of this property and the other properties to the east and west, are they zoned commercial as well, or they have a different zoning? I'm just wondering how that interconnection of roads amongst those four properties could be different than on the street side, if that is all commercial property versus.
Yeah, generally, about the first 200 feet from Kingston Pike back is commercial, kind of in a swath all the way across, even through the curve. And then the back part is residential that backs up to Fox Den.
And it is about the depth of the Dollar General site, so it
Okay.
Yeah, it's about 200 feet deep.
It's a larger end.
it runs about through here, and then it sort of
Keeps going
hooks
around the
up.
curve, yep.
Okay.
That was probably, I don't remember the history of that, but it's been zoned like that for ever, as far as I can remember,
Late 70s.
I think I have this
late 70s. Where you at?
I do have a question for the staff, just to make sure I understand what's being asked. So the sinkhole code, to me, looks like it's pretty clear. We're not supposed to fill the sinkholes. So the staff's, I guess you're not making a suggestion, but one argument to support a variance to the sinkhole code is because there's another Farragut code that contradicts it. And therefore, we can approve a variance for one code because we want to meet a different Farragut code. Is that,
Well, I think
As a simple
clearly
summary,
they're
but-
looking to fill it, based on their site plan and the way they would prefer to, develop their property. And, their original proposal, was to put the access drive and the walkway down at the front of the property. So, once the sinkhole was identified, they were either in a situation where they had to redesign, come up with some other alternative, like bridging, or request the variance. And when we reviewed it, I don't think it was one thing that, that we looked at. I think we were trying to look at a combination of the competing public interest of protecting sinkhole areas, but also providing for, the connectivity between development sites, and also walking trails and sidewalks along roads. And so, we, really tried to present both sides of that to you. Again, we didn't, recommend in favor of it or against it, because we really think it is a balancing act, for you all to, to consider on this. We do have, if you do grant the variance or choose to grant the variance, we had several conditions on that we'd like you to at least consider. And the first would be to require the developers to have a geotech come in and look at that and make sure, or, that it's at least reasonably stable, so that, there's no issues with further collapse, or at least as much as can be known. Obviously, they can only, go so far with that sort of analysis. Also, to put a note on the plans, on, pointing that out to future property owners that, there is a potential risk there, and they would be responsible for repairing at least the stuff on the private property. Now, the walking trail would I assume, Mark, be dedicated to the public as part of the platting process,
Yeah.
so that would
Yeah.
become the responsibility of the town long term.
Yes.
And then also there's just an additional stamp we wanted to get on the write-up you did for the variance application, where you put together that information on the fill and that sort of thing. We just it wasn't under your stamp, but that's a minor condition.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for the town at this point, or can we go ahead and give Mr. Dunaway a chance?
So you're telling me that once the walking trail is done, that it would be our upkeep from that point on?
Well, with walking trails, they get constructed. We, of course, inspect them, during the construction process and all that. But then we require a letter of credit to cover 2 years of maintenance for that and any other public improvements that the town may ultimately take over the responsibility for. So at the end of the 2-year period, we will go out and check the walking trail and make sure that, at least from a visual analysis, this is the typical process that I'm going over, that the trail appears to be in good condition. And then we would release the letter of credit, and then that walking trail would be taken over by the town. Similar to the one like at Costco, the one that runs in behind Costco, all the way around the development. Just recently we took that one over.
So in other words, if that was to sink 5 years down the road, it's us, we'd be back like we were with Willow Creek,
Yeah,
filling in sinkholes?
yes, sir. It would be our responsibility. At least that's the typical process. And there could possibly be some, language that would run with the land that would offer some potential protection in that regard. But in the typical cases, the town would be responsible for it at that point.
The access road would always be theirs?
Yeah, the access road would, typically those are just joint permanent access easements that are privately owned, but for the benefit of the public as a whole and all properties that, in the surrounding area. We have a number of those on Parkside Drive in behind some of the developments. Those are private joint access easements that are actually maintained by the association that is privately put together. They have an association that maintains their common properties and the boulevard and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I have no more.
All right, Mr. Dunaway, your opportunity.
Sure. Most of what I was going to say has been discussed. The basic history is pretty well laid out, but I'll tear through it again in case there's anything that's useful to you all in your decision. Obviously, we went pretty early with Mark on preliminary design to make sure what we needed to do. There are some architectural requirements, certainly in the C1 zone, that we had to go through. And Mark held the ground, and we've got a very nice-looking building right now to do. Brick and hip roof with a very residential look. Went through the site revisions and review also, went through the landscaping review and revisions, got that approved as well. Because there was a concern, all those major beautiful trees that are all along that whole half-mile stretch. But we are replacing at the rate that the zoning calls for there, so we're going to have a ton of new landscaping there. About $40,000 worth, best I remember. He did mention the sinkhole and said, look at it as kind of a weird situation. It connects to a pipe, so he said, get some kind of ruling from TDEC on it. So I met with Lee Yates from TDEC, the local office. He walked it with me. We looked in the pipe, saw both sides of the highway, and he said his initial response was that barrier that's created by Kingston Pike indicated that that was not part of the sinkhole across the highway. That was an informal response, but I got him to email that, and I forwarded that to Mark. And obviously, it was a little bit less than desirable from a technical standpoint for purposes of proving a sinkhole's, whether it was a sinkhole or not. So he asked me to go back to TDEC, and when I did, Lee said he would talk to his boss about it. I sent him, what I had in the way of plans, and they came back and realized the 934 contour is on our side. So they said, you will need to get a permit for this. So we applied immediately, and I was expecting a long process, but we had a permit in about 2 to 3 weeks from TDEC, which is saying something. Talking with them on the phone, they discussed the amount of displacement again that we were showing on our drawings, which are the same ones that you all are looking at, or the planning department looked at. And it was not any problem for them to grant this. I guess it's a sinkhole permit is what it amounts to from TDEC. We got that permit. We also got a TDOT permit for our driveway. We got another TDEC permit for general grading. We got the site permit, which Mark granted conditionally. The point we had our pre-con, we had gotten through all the comments, and frankly, we hadn't talked about sinkhole in a while, and I really thought that the requirement for the connector and the walking trail being a zoning requirement for C1 was superseding. But, to his credit, Mark had not said it was off the table. It just had not been talked about. I was getting comments back, and the last round of comments I got didn't mention it at all. And at that point, we had our TDOT or TDEC sinkhole permit in hand, so I assumed we were all right. But at the pre-con meeting, Mark mentioned again we had to deal with the sinkhole, the town of Farragut sinkhole ordinance, not just TDEC's version. So we went and looked at the drawings, and I got TDEC on the phone. Mark said if you can get some kind of a substantive letter from them saying that this is okay. I just connected those two guys up. Jeff Fields from Nashville, I think, called Mark, and they emailed back and forth. And I think at the end of that conversation, he ended up just resending the permit. Did he not? Or okay.
Yeah, I talked to Scotty Sorrells, actually.
Scott Sorrell, yeah, in place of Jeff Fields. He was the.
And he did tell me that they were, from what they look at and permit, that they were okay with the proposal, but he did tell me that they don't take into consideration structural, at least for roads and walking trails.
I mean, there was sinkholes can develop under paving at any time, anywhere in East Tennessee. They do, they did check and asked about the offset of the building, and we were well outside the 50-foot offset, so that was granted. And that's pretty much where we are with it right now. And again, Mark said you might want to come up with a plan to show we're not touching the sinkhole, but that would involve reeling in the driveway connector and the walking trail again. And so the amounts that we're displacing and the fact that we're, in my mind, mitigating it by a factor of I don't know how much with the addition of the biopond directly contingent to where that sinkhole is, I really thought it was a non-issue until we had to come before the board here. So that's where I am. I'm in the same boat you are, basically. We went through the design process, and we're told about the sinkhole ordinance, but we were also told to put in the walking trail and the drive connector, so we did that, and thought that was the choice, and here we are. I don't know if Terry has anything to add to that.
Oh, let me, before we move to Mr. Romans, can you tell me, Mr. Dunaway, what is your trade?
I'm a project manager for JMB Investment Company. That's the development arm for Michael Schad.
All right. Do you have any, or claim any expertise in engineering, hydrology, anything of that nature?
No, I'm not a licensed engineer by any chance, by any stretch. I've just done it for 35 years, but not designed it.
Just trying to figure it out, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, project manager.
All right, well, very good. Well, first, does anyone have any questions of Mr. Dunaway? All right. Mr. Romans, if you would please state your name and your address.
All right, Terry Romans, 1923 Hopewell Road, Knoxville, 37920. Own Romans Engineering. Have a master's degree in water resources, bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and so I can at least state the fact of it about the sinkhole as far as the stormwater goes.
Your degree in engineering, are you
Civil
saying-
engineering.
Okay, civil engineering. So you're not a hydrologist, hydrological engineer, anything of that nature?
Civil engineering is my bachelor's. My master's is in environmental engineering under water resources.
Very good. Okay. Do you have anything you'd like to add to the facts?
Well, I guess the facts, we're showing this big area hatched, like we're affecting all that area, but some of that area we're cutting, some of that area we're filling, so we're almost balancing it. And if you look at the area, the water drainage that's going into the sinkhole, and I did calculations on the major sinkhole, which you can't see everything there. I've got it on a drawing. But I took that whole drainage area into consideration before we even started this project and said, what can it handle? What will it handle? And it's just a tip of what the sinkhole will handle. Also, like back to the hatched area, we're not really affecting that whole hatched area. We're filling in some, but we're cutting out some. But we're also, if you go above the sinkhole, we're cutting a trench 4 foot wide deep. It's taking the stormwater underground and infiltrating it. So we're taking stormwater off of the sinkhole. I'm sure eventually it all goes to the same spot, right? Because it's all going underground. But we're really relieving the sinkhole a little bit from what we've done. So in my opinion, we're not really affecting this sinkhole at all, even though we're filling a little bit over by the parking lot to get our pond in, but we're cutting under that pond 4 foot deep.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Romans?
I do have a question for Mr. Dunaway. I apologize. So if the design of the property was changed to where the building could come forward and we maintain connectivity through another fashion, maybe not along Kingston Pike, but I guess maybe behind the building, how agreeable would that be?
Well, as Mark said, we looked at that up front. He mentioned it, and I did a quick site sketch for him to show that the main problem we ran against initially was truck access. Dollar General has a 70-foot tractor trailer once a week for deliveries, and to turn on the site, you need a kind of a 3-point in and straight out.
I see.
And if we flipped it, you can't get out. You could pull in straight, but you wouldn't be able to back up to get back onto the highway without backing into the highway. So that's part of it, obviously. I mean, we've done those in areas where we had rear access or other factors that we could get the truck out by another route, but we just can't on this site. And we pushed it pretty far back also to allow the natural drainage makes the bioretention ponds want to be at the frontage of the property. And so that also lent us to pushing back and having the parking and everything that was going to create the runoff near the bioretention. But we pushed it back as far off the highway as we could for appeal to get the building itself back. And of course, it's going to be, so I wish I had the landscaping plan up to show you. It's going to be so heavily landscaped in the front, all that area is going to be very attractive. Very small strip of asphalt, but it's there. We do have the islands that the landscape requirements also, call for to help soften it up. We can only go so far back. Yeah, Terry's telling me that we butt to the residential in the back, and there's a 35-foot requirement for a buffer there, leave it in its natural state. So that's where that building is. It's 36 feet off the back property line right now.
Yeah, there is a 35-foot buffer from the residentially zoned property south into this property. You can't put the access you can put a walking trail perpendicular and potentially even an access, but it would have to be perpendicular rather than parallel so that you wouldn't compromise the landscape component of the buffer strip. You wouldn't be consuming landscape space with some hardscape. So,
Regarding the structural question and one of the potential conditions you mentioned, I'd be glad to get our geotech engineer to investigate to the amount that the state will let him. That sinkhole of structural viability, they can go in there and do minor bores and get a report of some sort generated, if that would be helpful to you all. For the future development, I realize at the point it connects, you're going to want to know that that's buildable in whatever form they decide to make the connection.
Now, it looks like regardless of where you put the access road or the walking trail, you really don't know on the lot to the east what's there. If there's a sinkhole, another sinkhole, if so, where it's at. You could actually put it to where the road would come out right in a sinkhole.
Yeah, well, there's certainly the sinkhole that extends, this area extends onto the adjoining property, but there could be additional ones running up that drainage that runs to there in the same fashion there are, potential, so that is an issue. The water's moving down through there and there's a possibility that there's both surface and subsurface drainage coming down that drainage way. And I'm not a geologist or an engineer, but sinkholes do tend to run in lines and sometimes and there's potential that there could be additional on that property. But again, without a site evaluation on the properties to either side, we won't know that until they are actually developing those.
We did do ours. I mean, we bored our site for parking and building, and it came across, it's good old Tennessee red clay. A little bit of topsoil depth at the low end, but that was expected. And it looks like that would lend itself east and west just looking at the topography, but you don't ever know for sure, I understand. And so our site was definitely solid.
And also, if you're worried about that, where the water's draining to that catch basin, I mean, that catch basin, I pulled the TDOT plan, that thing's been there since the 60s, maybe? You can look at it and see that obviously Kingston Pike's never overtopped. There's not a lot of water. If that catch basin is catching that water and going through a 1.5 by 2 foot box culvert that they built, I don't know when, there's not a lot of water running. We're not, and then we're holding ours back. So I mean,
that's all
I just don't
stormwater
see us
design.
impacting the at least the stormwater runoff of the sinkhole. No.
And again, we didn't, I don't think the town staff really questioned the drainage aspects of it. It was just more the filling in the sinkhole area and the sinkhole ordinance, in regard to that.
With regard to the residential that's platted behind it, is it possible that the way that it's zoned now, you could have a multi-story residential behind it so that you have condos, townhouses, things like that I typically think of having a sea of asphalt around them with a large roof structure, which increases the amount of water flow that will go into a system such as that?
not in the current zoning of that
Okay.
area. It's just single-family residential,
Sorry.
low density.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does have street access, all but that one lot to the west.
Okay.
It does, well, I'm talking about back street access.
Yeah.
It's Champion Drive and,
That side street, I can't remember the name of it.
Champion.
Champions.
The rest of our property is just Champion.
Yeah.
So in following up on that question, what's the future land use plan for that property behind there? Do we have that map?
Yeah, we should have that memorized.
That's on the north side of Kingston Pike.
I don't remember, to be honest with you.
Because that may lend itself to, if the town has plans to do a higher density residential and future land use that would support rezoning that property, that could be addressed in the question you just
Yeah,
asked.
I don't remember. I know it does back up to Fox Den, so
Chances are that it's not.
I mean, it would be a challenge to, oh, there you go.
I actually have it. So we're talking here.
Yeah.
So it's very low, very low,
Yeah, sure is.
because we're talking, well, no, we're talking this property here, correct?
Yeah, that is.
So we're talking medium-density residential's future land use behind it,
Yeah, it does.
piece behind the.
Which,
So it
you
is
know, that
future
could
land
be
use.
a transitional land use from
Right.
commercial to lower density residential, something like that, from a land use perspective, but from a, other perspectives, it might be a challenge to change that to something other than what it is right now.
Well, and making a comment upon it, we don't have any countering testimony to what you're presenting about your professional opinions, given your own qualifications as to what this is likely to affect in the sinkhole or not. I mean, this board, from my perspective at least, is still constrained with construing the ordinance. And so, and to the applicant's, I think that the applicant has been very straightforward. I think that the applicant in Exhibit A has absolutely identified the issue in the sinkhole variance request on the second page, which is the back page of their Exhibit A, their application. They have clearly said what the rule is. Ordinance states that no fill or construction shall occur below the sinkhole lip elevation unless proper mitigation measures are taken and avoidance of the sinkhole is not possible. No fill shall be placed and no construction shall occur below the sinkhole lip elevation for the construction of local streets, driveways, or walking trails. In reconciling that, I think that they've fairly framed the issue in reason justification for variance, which is, one, the proposed fill is for a walking trail, access road, and stormwater management, all for the public welfare. Now, I mean, that's the issue that I'm having problem with, which is this board isn't here to determine what's for the public welfare, and we're not here to write or rewrite the sinkhole ordinance. We're to look at what the ordinary and normal use of the words say. And again, in Exhibit B, Section 14405, subsection 1, if it's not defined in the ordinance, we're to use the latest edition of Webster's Unabridged Dictionary. And basically, the way all statutes are construed is to give them their ordinary, normal use and construction. If you go back up and look again at the need for this entire ordinance, and again, keeping in mind that I'm not making any judgment on whether it's going to increase water or not, in section 14403, it says sinkhole areas are also known to be unstable for construction and drainage. Structures placed on soil foundations in sinkhole areas may be subject to flooding, settling, or collapse. And then skipping down to the third paragraph under 14403, last sentence, the immediate area surrounding a sinkhole must be disturbed as little as possible. And then if you look at the purpose on section 14404, the purpose of this ordinance is to protect existing and future development from flooding due to sinkhole overflow and backup, to protect underground drainage systems from clogging due to sediment and debris, to protect the structural integrity of buildings and roads built near sinkholes, and to work with the state of Tennessee to protect groundwater resources from contamination due to pollutant runoff into sinkholes. I think reading that in context of the rule that's expressed in section 14407, that I'm still having difficulty going outside of what I believe this board can do, and it does look to me like it's going to require some sort of clarification from the people that drafted the rules, or at least some sort of modification. So that is my concern.
I think the purpose supports the request. If you read the purpose. I don't see that what they're doing is going to constitute flooding or overflow or backup. I think they're making effort to, for the drainage. I don't see that it will affect the integrity of the building or the road. Kingston Pike is not sunken, I don't know how many years, which is the road that's built near the sinkhole. That's my thought.
I think my opinion is probably similar to Mr. Alley. I'm having a hard time reconciling code that clearly says sinkholes should not be filled. And the question at hand is the request for a variance justified to go beyond this code and not, I guess, recognize it or give one group of folks an exception to very defined code? I certainly hear what you say, Mr. Williams, and I respect it. Again, the method itself is very clear. We're not to fill sinkholes. And so I'm with Mr. Alley. I'm having a hard time reconciling that. It's not your fault. It's more of just trying to reconcile two opposing codes. You have to swear yourself in.
Yeah.
Or do we swear in?
We did not.
Do we trust her?
I will swear you were not sworn in earlier, were you?
Okay.
All right.
Well, okay,
Do you
sorry.
swear or affirm to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, if you please state your name and address.
Louise Pavlin, 12830 Stahl Drive. I just want to make the observation that we as a town have presented, we have created this quandary. And we need to resolve it, as you say. I'm wondering if because I don't think we would want to put something into a sinkhole like you observed without having the rest of it going. Bringing it to the edge, to the lip, makes sense to me until you have the rest of the property on the east side develop. That way you're resolving, we're staying true to the code. We're trying to stay true to our zoning ordinance until we can resolve this. But that's the issue we create when we use words like the emphatic words we've used, where there is no flexibility, and we're the ones that are requiring the sidewalk, the trail, the connection. So that's all I had to say. Sorry.
Can I ask Alderwoman Pavlin a question since she spoke? So to make sure I understand what you're saying, so if the walking trail was scooted back a little bit and was not touching the lip, is that what you're overall saying, suggesting?
I think until we can resolve this, that's them move along with their project until we can resolve that. And it may not an easy legislative fix, but it's something that we need to probably talk through the MPC and then up through the board. But it's something that we need to take a look at, because we've created a quandary we're going to run into this again.
And it probably needs to be fixed now. So staff, how do we carry out Alderwoman Pavlin's suggestion? Because I guess I didn't think that bringing the sidewalk back was an option. But if we can bring it back to where it's not touching the lip and then, work it out through the legislative process, I would personally be comfortable with that.
Well, I mean, you could deny the request and not allow any fill in the sinkhole lip elevation. Then the town legislatively may need to revisit some of the language in the sinkhole ordinance, because I think it's true, we're going to run into these kind of situations again. A lot of the land that's not developed in the town probably has constraints like this. Now, I'm a big proponent of protecting the sinkholes, so I think we got to be really careful about trying to balance that. The thing is, with this particular development is, if you don't change it now, you're predisposing where it's going to be going, and it's going to be crossing what is now been identified as a sinkhole, and that's going to have to be rectified someday, somehow. So you could deny the request and say you can't do any fill in this per the exact language that we have, and they could pull it back and all that, and they could probably design something that has no fill in this sinkhole area. But if that's where the desired access is to go in the long term, then it's going to have to be dealt with sooner or later.
So being dealt with, would that go to BOMA, to
Well, if it's,
the Planning
legislatively,
Commission?
we'd take
Okay.
it through the Planning Commission
Through the
for
text
a
amendment.
recommendation to
Okay.
the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, maybe even the Stormwater Advisory Committee, since it's related to stormwater. And they could always run the access laterally up and over.
Draw that, please.
You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Yeah. They could just remove the stub out altogether and extend, and then come over right below the buffer. And then whenever the property to the east develops, then they'd have to tie in at that point.
The property owner to the east would have to, because they'd have a stub here, right?
Yes, because then they would predispose the connection to be up there, which is fine. I'm not against that. I mean, but then you're also going to have to deal with the walking trail to get it somehow across. Where's the logical place for that to stub out to the property to the east, so that when that property develops, it will tie into the walking trail as well?
Sure, but Mr. Williams' point earlier is a good point in that if this board granted a variance and the walking trail were built and filled in on the part of the property that's theirs with the sinkhole, it could be a walking trail to nowhere that leads to a much larger sinkhole on the property to the, I mean, that's a wild guess. We know there's more sinkhole over there. We just don't know how much or whether anyone's ever going to be able to connect anything to that walking trail. And so we'd be granting a variance with no purpose, potentially, if we did that. Does the town have authority through its stormwater management to go on that property and to learn more about it? I mean, obviously, you can get anyone's permission to do anything if they give you permission, but...
That I don't know.
Well, I mean, we'd have to have professionals that know
Sure.
that can do that analysis, and they would have
Costs
to get
money.
permission of the property owner.
Yeah.
Which is a very common thing to do.
Yes.
And the sinkhole that we know is on the adjoining property to the east is bounded by that dark dotted line. I mean, that's a given. You know, whether or not there's any additional constraints on that property would then take, site investigation. So we know that everything within that dark dotted line falls within the 934 contour. So it's all considered part of the sinkhole area.
But I mean, if this board, for example, were given evidence that everything to the east was in a sinkhole, for example, and I realize that's an extreme, but everything to the east was in the sinkhole, and there's absolutely no point putting an access road or granting a variance to go over there because it's not going to go to anything ever, or a walkway. I mean, that would be compelling information to grant a variance to not have to do any of this.
Well, you probably wouldn't even need a variance because you
No.
could probably do the work without
There you go.
filling in it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another element that from my mind is sort of missing from this. But again, I agree. I think the
All
rule
we
is
can go
clear
by
for
is the
me.
best available information that we can have access to, and there does appear to be a small depression on the east, the property to the east, but we don't know if that's actually a sinkhole.
We have a topo map of that?
That's what we were basing it
Yeah, you got
off of, just the KGIS. you know,
Probably
which-
not in enough detail on the PowerPoint that, that you could see exactly, there are other, what appears to be some other depressions on the property, but, they could be anything, and they'd each
Yeah,
have
it
to
may
be
not
evaluated.
Anything. Sure.
Can I ask two questions of the developer, and this kind of applies to the town as well? So first of all, as the blue line's drawn there, is there any objection, or do you see that would cause an unreasonable use of the property to stub out the road in the back versus the front, which eliminates the need for the variance?
The thing I see immediately is it's going to eat up at least 2 parking spaces. There's a loading area back there where an enclosed dumpster also is, right about the corner of that purple line there. I mean, to do a road connection across there behind the sinkhole is, if it's a 25-foot road, it's going to eat up 3 parking spaces. I'm perfectly fine with doing that. My client might not be, losing 3 more spaces. We were already down a couple because of the width of the islands that was required, so.
So my second question was, in your discussions with the town regarding the sinkhole, was there ever consideration given to requesting a variance to the C1 zoning ordinance to not stub out the access road and the walking trail because the sinkhole was, counterintuitive to doing that? You're going to have to violate the sinkhole ordinance.
I understand your question. I never asked that. I didn't think to. It was,
Well, I mean, if I were asked that, I would say you have other ways of getting the connection, just like is shown there. Now, we don't know what's on the east side of the
I mean,
property,
honestly,
so-
looking at it, eyeballing it, when I take up those 3 spaces towards the rear to miss the sinkhole entirely, I could add the 3 where the current access driveway is.
Ask if you could do
Correct. That's
So-
what I think.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of. The parking would come
As
down.
long as I don't get too close to the
then
throat of the driveway.
You just have to make sure you wouldn't have any fill in the sinkhole lip area.
And as long as you all are all right with, obviously, relegating that future development, that property owner would have to make their connection up there, loop up around that sinkhole as well to make the connection.
You're first.
Well, yeah, we're first now, but we're talking about the future, and it seems to be pretty, taking a lot of bearing on the decisions. I'd have to also, my client, I'm not going to be crazy, but about 3 traffic going that close, to all their, where their customer parking is, but that's something we have discussed when there's future interparcel connectivity required, so that's probably still an okay thing.
The other thing is that parking lot, you've got a notch right there where the line's drawn. Is that where the dumpster sits?
It sits right in the corner of that notch. There's an enclosed dumpster right in the corner of that. The last space there's a radius that turns back, and the dumpster's in that actual corner of the paved area there. Yeah, what's in that little corner is grass right now.
Is there any reason why that parking lot can't go a little farther north and then
Buffer.
turn
Buffer. 35-foot buffer. We're pretty close
on
to
the parking lot? I knew the building, but
it.
Well, I mean, you also have to think, it's not, you got the 35-foot buffer and you can't do anything in that, but, that's not the only site layout or building plan that you could do on the property too. That might be a preference, but we really can't assess something on preference because somebody could put a smaller building there potentially and meet the different requirements. I'm not saying I'm just saying that you got to base it on, you can't base it on their site layout as the only way to do it, because there's certainly plenty of ways that you could fit everything in there and not need a variance to the sinkhole ordinance probably.
And I think you also have to consider the walking trail as well.
Yeah, how are we going to
which-
get the walking trail laterally connected, I think is another thing that we would have to think about. If you extended the access up there, the access would be relatively easy, but then getting the walking trail, would be, I don't know. haven't given it enough thought, really.
Are there going to be areas in town where if sinkholes obviously have this much bearing, you're just going to have places where you can't do the interconnectivity? Is that an acceptable possible outcome given the opposing?
Well, I think that's probably part of the larger discussion that we need to have in relation to the legislative process with the language of the ordinance. I think we all want to protect sinkholes, but I think we need to think about it and while still protecting sinkholes, maybe provide for some, maybe potentially a little more flexibility when you can demonstrate that the purpose and intent of the ordinance is clearly not being compromised.
Would having information on a future developer connecting to the existing extension as drawn, walking trail and the driveway, whatever it would take to make that connection, if we could get some sort of a calculations done by a civil combined with input from a geotech engineer for structural stability, also combined with input from TDEC for the function of the sinkhole, would that be something that would be worthy of considering? Because I think TDEC's opinion is going to be about the volume of the sinkhole, that as long as we're mitigating and creating that capacity again in other areas, that adding that driveway will not be a problem as far as the function of the sinkhole, as far as the state is concerned. So if I had something from them to that effect and obviously a geotech report showing that you can build onto that in the future structurally, and that the capacity of the sinkhole is not affected as far as the state of Tennessee is concerned, would that satisfy the town of Farragut?
We can't give opinions about things that aren't before us
Okay.
or guidance on how to proceed. The makeup of the board can change, the ordinance can change, lots of things can change.
Okay.
So as a practical matter, we can't give you any guidance on, all we can do is look at the facts we have before us and the application before us. Okay. It's sort of like, we also can't fix the problem of where the walking trail goes. We're not charged with coming up with alternate plans to put things. We're charged with looking at what the application is and either saying that's something that we can grant a variance and believe that we have the authority and the desire to do or not. So it goes a little bit, it does go beyond,
Understand.
in my opinion, what we can do.
So maybe for the town again, I'm just trying to clarify because I'm really struggling with reasonable use of the property as Mr. Shipley brought out a moment ago. And obviously the walking trail is a main concern of the town, and that's understandable. I just want to gain a little understanding if that walking trail, could it be moved across the back of those properties between the commercial and the residential properties as a, in that 35-foot easement area, the 35-foot buffer zone? Would it be appropriate to have a walking trail, or do we have to give more of an easement than, we can't put that in the buffer? I'm just looking at that walking trail could potentially be moved, in which actually with the medium density residential behind those properties, if that's what was zoned, that would actually support connectivity to that medium density residential or even a lower density residential, plus it keeps it off the main road. That may not be the best. I just don't know if that's something with respect to how the walking trail's done.
Trail on the site plan, there actually is a walking trail that would come out like that connects into the residential property.
Right. So my thought was it.
Comes into it, but it crosses the buffer perpendicular.
Right. So what,
parallel.
I guess my question is, can you put the walking trail within the buffer area, parallel to the buffer area? Is
No.
that possible under ordinance or not? Okay.
No,
that
that
was
would
the
be a
question.
violation of another.
So we would need another 10-foot easement or something on top of the 35-foot buffer in order to move the trail back there.
Yeah, I'm just getting it
Okay.
from the front to the back. Would you have to have a redesign a little bit, probably.
Well, my consideration was all four of those properties in totality, instead
be
of
on
the
the
walking
back.
trail running along the road, running
Yeah.
along the back of between the commercial and residential properties instead, but it doesn't look like we would have the distance to do that without encroaching on the buffer zone. Again, I'm looking for use of property. That's the only reason I'm asking the question. I'm not trying to redesign. I just want to clearly understand if we could put that in the buffer or not, because that speaks to use of the
You
property.
can't put it parallel in the buffer. You could cross it like what was approved in a rather
Okay.
perpendicular manner, because you're not really compromising the landscape aspect of most of the buffer.
If you're not in the buffer, though, you can put it perpendicular all day long. So you can
Yeah.
move the building forward towards the road, you can make
Yes.
the building smaller, and you can make it perpendicular as long as it's not in the buffer, and that'd be
That's right.
completely compliant.
That's
Okay.
correct, yes, that's right.
All right, do we have any further questions, or do I have any motions to entertain?
I would like to move that we deny the variance request due to conflicting codes, and because there are other options the developer could, in fact, entertain.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Do I have any discussion on the
Yes.
issue?
Yes, can we add to that we have legislation look at it? As far as,
I would be glad to add that if I can.
It'd be part of your recommendation that you would advise the town to maybe consider this legislatively.
I will add that I advise the town in my motion to revisit the contradiction between the two codes and provide some flexibility with the sinkhole code.
As amended, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, any further discussion?
none.
All right, call for the vote. All in favor of the motion to deny with the referral, please say aye.
Aye.
That sounded like all of us, so motion carries.
Yes, it did, sound like a 4-0.
Gentlemen,
So where does
thank-
that leave me?
You did an excellent job. It wasn't your fault.
But I have a project.
You do.
to,
But where it leaves you is, as far as tonight is concerned, revisit it with the town and get it before the
I
body that
think
makes
what
the law.
I would recommend, Tim, is just do a revised grading plan to show that you're not filling it all in that sinkhole, and we'll deal with how the accesses occur based on what happens legislatively.
The access is being the driveway and the walking trail.
I mean, I think we could just, until this is addressed legislatively, then you would just not show any fill in the sinkhole and amend your grading plan to show that, and then I'd probably just stub it, bring it back a little bit, but, and we'll just have to figure out, what we're going to do with this legislatively.
Can I ask how long that legislative process is expected to take? And how it will impact the release of my building permit?
That I'll have to get back with you on that, because that's really beyond the Board of Zoning Appeals, but
Okay.
we'll try to work as best we can with your schedule.
We're glad to move the building over, and we're glad to do any fill in or out, or take it in or put it out as benefits the town. But I've got to keep more forward motion going. We're due to dig footings next week under our permit, and of course, all we have right now is our approved site permit, grading permit.
Well, clearly in the short term, I would revise your grading and submit that so that you're not showing any fill in that sinkhole lip elevation area. You're not violating, in other words, you're not violating the language of the sinkhole ordinance. Present a plan for that.
Then all we'll be up against is the other ordinance
It's
that
just
requires
how
us to have
it's just how to
connectivity.
get the connectivity, yes.
In answer to your question earlier, I wish I had asked about getting a variance to the C1 if I'd have known this was the path it was going to go, because now I am deeply engaged in that site. We will get the drawing revised, and my basic intent would probably be just to scoot everything west as far as I need to make that happen. It's not going to be very much to get out of the sinkhole. Do you want us to just remove it to the point where we leave the extension in on the walking trail and the drive aisle, but stop it short of the sinkhole so that ordinance is okay.
Mr. Dunaway, what I might suggest, since
We'll just have
the
to get
business of the
together.
board is
Yeah.
at an end,
Yeah,
if
this-
I have a motion to
I
adjourn.
understand.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, we're off the record, and you gentlemen are welcome to talk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mark, you had a training session. Do you still want to do that, or has this gone beyond our reasonable expectations?
Probably gone long.
That's what I thought. All right.